Same time, we're going to do all we can to register as many voters as possible so that we can, as the Progressive National Baptist Convention, uphold democracy. Uphold democracy. And so we're 58 years removed from the Voting Rights Bill being signed, 9 years removed from the tragic slaying and subsequent thugification of Mike Brown Jr. Mike Brown Jr., a human being, a son with dreams, should be alive today as a college graduate. But Mike Brown is not, because of a criminal justice system that criminalized him and has been downright unjust. But oh, we're glad to be here in St. Louis today, because that same community where his body lay for over 4.5 hours has shown us that after every crucifixion, there is a resurrection. And so we salute Mike Brown Sr. We salute the citizens of that wonderful community there in Ferguson who rose up in prophetic protest and declared that we are not going to stand by and allow you to thugify our young black men. We're not going to stand by and allow you to do nothing about the criminality of a justice system that is unjust and downright criminal. And so 9 years later, things have changed, and they are changing because of the community there in Ferguson, led by those on-the-ground activists who said, yeah, you may have taken our son, but we're going to rise up, and we're going to change this system for the better. And so we welcome you, we salute you, and we thank God Mike Brown Jr. still lives because of a legacy that you are ensuring maintains its resurrection possibilities. And so, yeah, Progressive, we in the house. We are here in the Lou, and we've come here 58 years after the Voting Rights Bill was passed to say we're going to revive it, and then 9 years after the slaying of Mike Brown to say there's another resurrection that's about to take place. And so we thank you so much, Progressive, for being progressive. And after the word we just heard upstairs, we're determined to make America great, finally.
The new leader of Rainbow Push, the Reverend Dr. Freddie Douglass Haynes III. The co-chair who will talk about our priorities based upon our resolutions moving forward, expressing the vision of our president, Dr. Willie D. Francois III.
How important it is for us to be in this part of the world 9 years after the murder of Mike Brown. It's important for PMBC to be here. We know it, but the media should know it in order to tell the world that this is the denominational home of the Civil Rights Movement. You do not have the Civil Rights Act of 1964 without PMBC. You do not have the Voting Rights Act of 1965 without PMBC. You do not have the Fair Housing Act of 1968 without PMBC. Because when no other American denomination was willing to put this as a priority, as an article of faith, it was this convention that was born out of rebellion to Jim Crow democracy and Jim Crow economics. It's important for us to be in St. Louis because not very far from here, the movement was sparked. Ferguson, as I said this morning, is ground zero for the Black Lives Matter movement, the same way Montgomery was ground zero for the civil rights movement. It's important for Progressive National Baptist Convention to be in St. Louis. What a tragedy it is that so much of what it means to be a Christian has been co-opted by white nationalists. But there's something about the rebellious imagination of folk like us, the Progressive National Baptist Convention, that says we have political priorities that aren't limited to policing who people sleep with and policing what women do with their bodies. The Progressive National Baptist Convention is actually pro-life because we care about bodies before they are born all the way through the tomb. How important it is for us to be here to raise the stark contrast to the white Christian nationalism that tried to tear down the Capitol in Washington on January 6th, because it reminds us that January 6th was not just a moment, but is really a mood that is brewing across pockets of this country. And so PNBC comes here today as a dramatization of that carpenter from Palestine who was policed by his own government and crucified by his own government, but demonstrated the power of resurrection that lets us understand that God's power is bigger than injustice, and God's power is bigger than what an empire thinks it can do to non-white bodies. The Progressive National Baptist Convention is in St. Louis this week because we know that voting rights should be guaranteed for every American adult. That is why we are not just calling for the passage of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, but we are calling for a 28th constitutional amendment, because voting should not be something that is renewed on a basis by a group of people who want to ratify exclusion and who want to author death, but the voting rights should be guaranteed by the very Constitution that makes this country distinct from other countries in this world. We are also calling for accountability in policing. We went today to Ferguson to stand in solidarity with this family, to practice the presence of God, to practice the ministry of presence, because we are tired of blue privilege, blue terror, and blue violence. It is not enough for us to talk about gun violence in our communities without also talking about that gun violence that we've normalized, and that's police gun violence. And so we are here to name that we will get the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which we know should also be in the name of Mike Brown, because it is his life that sparked our resistance to a police system that is supposed to be our protectors, but instead of being committed to public safety for all, they've been committed to public safety for the few, which often means the death and the extermination and the slow genocide of black bodies and black boys, black girls, black women, and black men. We don't just need public safety, we need public love. We need a system of accountability that honors the fact that black bodies are not criminal, that black bodies are not chattel, and that black bodies are not disposable. Isn't it interesting that the same people who were chattel in this country are now the very people who are being called criminal in this country as a way of authoring our erasure from this country that we helped build? A nation that is built on stolen land and stolen labor, but there is no American democracy without black power. We are here again in St. Louis to reaffirm our partnership with the AFL-CIO, where we are committed to registering as many people to vote as possible and to organize around a policy agenda that we set. We are tired of politicians asking us and benefiting and pimping our robes and pimping our collars for their agenda. If they want our votes, they need to sign on to our agenda, and we are calling for for health care for everyone. We are calling for free school education that will be funded by the federal government through college. We are calling for a jobs guarantee that the federal government must be the employer of last resort, and we have the capacity to abolish involuntary joblessness. We are here in St. Louis because we are a denomination with an agenda to build black power, an agenda to name that black lives don't just matter, but to name that you don't have an America without black power and without black bodies. I say this as Dr. King says, that any religion that claims to be concerned about the souls of people, but not the slums that condemn those souls and the economic conditions that strangle those souls, is dry as dust religion. And PNBC is not merit-bound, it is not dead, it is alive, and this country better watch out, because we will get justice or else.
Again, we don't do ordinary press conferences. Before we hear from our president, we want to hear from two of our partners. We announced partnerships. We announced our partnership with the AFL-CIO and Mr. Terrence Melvin, the president of CBTU, will be part of our panel discussion. We've announced our partnership with Amnesty International USA on our gun violence prevention, and Mr. Ernest Covington will be here. We are announcing our renewed partnership with the Chosen for Change Foundation, and the Brown family will be here. So they'll be part of the panel discussion. But we wanted to introduce one of our panelists. Joya Thornton is the executive director of the Faith Leaders of Color Coalition. Their mission is the abolition of the death penalty. We're going to ask her to come for a few minutes. We'll introduce our representative from the National Action Network, and then we'll hear from our president, and then we'll go into our panel discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm not a preacher, so I need my notes. To President Peoples, co-chairs Gray, Francois, Dr. Haynes, and other dignitaries, officials, and people of faith, I am Joya Erin Thornton, the National Director of the Faith Leaders of Color Coalition, an organization that engages black clergy in policy issues, particularly around the American death penalty system. I stand here arm in arm with the Brown family, clergy, and people of faith who are intentional and about being participatory in our policy efforts and engagement with lawmakers, as Dr. Francois said. We want to bring forth results that promote equity and opportunity for those who are historically disenfranchised in their communities and who are over-policed and often selectively policed. The Brown family is a representative of many families who fear when their sons are born. They have the talk with them as early as 3 years old and hope that they return home each night. This shouldn't be the norm. This shouldn't be business as usual. So with Flock and with the vehicle of Flock, we position and we poise and we posture clergy to show up, but not just show up, act when issues like these arise. And clergy and people of faith are critical in policy issues in the South. You can't do policy without them. Both now and forever, clergy will continue to show up and be a critical factor in their own policy efforts in their states and also in the federal government. Thank you.
A member of PNBC, a congregational member of PNBC, the Reverend Dr. Nelson Rivers III, one of the vice presidents for the National Action Network, representing the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Good afternoon, beloved President Peoples, leadership of our convention. I bring you greetings on behalf of the National Action Network the Reverend Al Sharpton, and also the Charity Missionary Baptist Church down in Liberty Hill, North Charleston, South Carolina. I came succinctly to ask you to join us on behalf of the son of one of the founders of this organization, Martin Luther King III, his beautiful wife, Andrea Waters King, and the Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network. Today, unbeknownst to me, I'm working on a sermon, Dr. Lewis, called The Serendipitous Moves of God. And today, I did not remember this was the 9th anniversary of the killing of Mike Brown. When I got up this morning, I did not know I'd be standing at the place where his body lay for 4.5 hours. 2 months ago, I was in Jackson, Mississippi, where Medgar Wiley Evers was shot to death in his back and lay in that same driveway. And every time we go, the blood of Medgar is still in the driveway. We come to say to you that the Supreme Court has told us what time it is. We have states all over the country, especially one down somewhere around the bottom of the country, that is trying to tell us that slavery was beneficial to black folk. And no matter what has happened, the big challenge we have as a people and as PNBC, we have been largely silent. We've been mad in church, we've been mad in the street, but we have not been mad in where the power rests, which is Washington, D.C. So 60 years ago, August the 28th, 60 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. got up and did a speech that became a sermon. And he was speaking until Mahalia Jackson said, "Martin, tell him about your dream." And every good Baptist knows sooner or later you got to turn to go home. And if you ain't got no turn, you can't go home. So he turned to, I have a dream this afternoon. And he really was repeating what he said in Detroit a few weeks earlier, and it worked in Detroit. He figured it must going to work here in D.C. But I come by to tell you that the church all over America rose up, and young people came to D.C. to do the impossible and the incredible. When people look at it now, they think it was easy. It was the biggest march like it and the first one like it in the history of America. 60 years have come and gone, and we are not going to commemorate it. We're going to continue the work of the march. The rights that we received after 63 through blood, sweat, and tears have all been under attack systematically. Please join us, PNBC, as we march. We invite pastors and churches to send buses to D.C. We leave on the 25th of August. We'll be there the morning, 8 a.m. in the morning on the 26th. We will go to the Lincoln Memorial where we have a program, and we will march from the Lincoln Memorial to the man who has a statue for him, Dr. King. We invite you. What would a march be on Washington if we were not involved through PNBC? What would a march be if we don't remember Dr. King? And the amazing thing about what happened to me today was that the spirit of Mike Brown was still living in the young people who were there. Beloved, it is not enough to talk about what was. We need to talk about what is and what shall be. So march with us. Contact myself, 843-412-2249, 843-412-2249. If you don't remember that, then hit Darrell Gray. Darrell Gray got everybody's number in his phone. Just reach out to Darrell Gray. And we want to invite you to march with us on the 26th. The time has come for the black church to not just talk about it. We must be about it. If nobody else is going to march, PNBC got to march. Get on the bus. Let's go tell the power what God said to tell Pharaoh. Let
I do have Nelson's number. It gives me great pleasure and honor now to introduce to the press the national president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, Reverend David R. Peoples.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. Thank you, Dr. Haynes and Dr. Francois and Dr. Gilbert, Dr. Gray, and to our first vice, Dr. Bird, and second vice, Dr. Thompson, our General Secretary, Dr. Kerry, and to all of you, and to our fellow dignitaries on the platform, to all of you, my brothers and sisters in Christ, and to the media this day. We are glad to be here in St. Louis as we share here the Hyatt at the Arch. But we're here on the King's business. We are the denominational home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we're proud to be that denomination. And we want to tell you that we won't stop.
Say that. Say
I said we won't stop. We won't stop until what Dr. King said, until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. We won't stop until Florida Governor DeSantis understands that slavery never benefited any African American. We won't stop until DeSantis and Florida legislation, until they understand that you can't have our money if you don't honor our history. We won't stop until the Texas Governor Abbott stops immoral practices for those black and brown crossing borders and living on borders just trying to seek a better way. I said we won't stop. We won't stop until the real thugs like Donald Trump, who are the real threat to democracy, get justice they deserve. We won't stop until black farmers get access to federal money. I said we won't stop. We won't stop until there's health care for everybody. I said we won't stop until the AFL-CIO and PNBC continue to push back voting suppression, until everybody gets a chance to vote. Even those who have paid their time, they have a right to vote. We won't stop until everyone can realize the dream to vote and understand that all of us are God's children. We won't stop until we understand what's happened to Mike Brown, and we thank God for his father here. But what happened 9 years ago, being brutally killed, we won't stop until our people are no longer used for target practice. We won't stop until we change our criminal justice system. We won't stop until we stop police brutality. We won't stop. We won't stop until Supreme Court reverses its ruling and see affirmative action is still necessary. We won't stop, y'all. We won't stop until we understand and men stop telling women and making legislation against women and their body, that men stop telling women what you can do with their body. We won't stop. We won't stop until we do justly, till we love mercy, until we walk humbly with the Lord our God and love our neighbor as ourselves. We will hold you accountable. We are the Progressive National Baptist Convention. We're in Texas. We're in New York. We're in Florida. We're in Kentucky. We're in California. We're in Dallas, Texas. We're all over this country and abroad. We can see, and we serve a God that sits high but looks low. And you will answer someday. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. And what you do unto the least of these, my brothers, you do it unto him. We won't stop until he calls us home.
We don't do press conferences like other people do press conferences. If the media have any questions for any of the speakers, we'll entertain those questions. All right.
You mentioned that they can't have our money. I wonder what that looks like. In the 1960s, some of the original organizing, there were boycotts. Now, there's saying, go woke, go broke. It looks like that strategy is changing. What do you make of that push? And what does the activism look like in 2023?
Excuse me. Remember, it's a press conference. Well, okay. Come on, y'all. Thank you. We're going to respect. The questions are to the panelists. I know that everybody doesn't hear it, but because they have a mic, you'll hear the answer. But everybody won't hear. Now, we are going to have a panel discussion, so I'm going to ask everyone to, we're going to ask the panelists to repeat the question. Thank you. Will that suffice? Okay.
And would you phrase the question again, please, so I can be clear?
Sure. One of the remarks was, you can't have our money if you don't honor our history as a
Right.
In the early days of the Rainbow Push Coalition, as I understood it, there were boycotts, there was
Right.
It looks like there's some backlash there. What do you make of that? And what is the specific call for activism today? What should that look like in 2023?
Well, to that backlash, we have a blacklash, and that simply means if I think you phrased it, go woke, go broke. No, we're saying if you ain't woke, you'll go broke. Because we will not buy where we are not respected. You have seen a number of our black organizations to pull out of convention commitments to the state of Florida. You've heard the NAACP declare Florida as unsafe for black people. And so the phraseology we are saying is, if you ain't woke, we'll make sure you're broke. Because we are not going to, again, you brought up the history of Rainbow Push under Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. He insisted not on charity, but parity. And that meant economic respect, economic justice. And so as a consequence, and he was basically piggybacking on what Dr. King said in his last speech, April 3rd, 1968, in which he said, if you're not going to respect our money, our people, then we're going to pull our money. And so we have a history of doing that, and we say to this nation, look forward to us saying to you, if you do not respect our people, you will respect our money. So if you ain't woke, we'll make sure that you go broke, because our money keeps this country going. And this country respects money. Capitalism respects capital. And so again, the best thing you'd want to do, if you want to not go broke, make sure that your policies are woke. That sounds like Jesse.
Are there any other questions? How does the narrative meet the change?
You go, ma'am. It's not going on the internet. Live stream.
Hi, how you doing? You spoke about changing the narrative about gun violence and social justice. How so?
Yeah, one of the ways that we are committed to changing the narrative is by first demonstrating that black voters, who are the backbone of this democracy, don't just vote for color, and we don't just vote for particular parties, but we are issue voters too. There are people who often want to paint us as personality voters, but black folk vote on issues, right? And we are not single issue people. It's our beloved sister, Audre Lorde, that said we cannot have single issue, we cannot fight for single issues because we don't live single issue lives, right? So the first shift to the narrative is to be clear that black voters are issue voters and we don't just sell our vote cheaply. The second piece that I think is important is to name, particularly related to gun violence, is that we have to talk about gun violence not as a black issue, but gun violence as an American issue. There is no other country in the world that has an addiction to guns the way America has an addiction to guns. In fact, guns seems to be one of our gods, and the Second Amendment is the Bible of this country. And we are saying that when we talk about gun violence, we are talking about America's addiction to violence, America's addiction to steal, that is also alive in non-white communities. But we have to also say what Dr. King says, and that it is the American government that taught its citizens what violence actually looks like, right? So the narrative shift is gun violence is not a black issue. Although it impacts black lives, it is an American issue that is a cancer to our very democracy. And if we want to solve gun violence, it is about, yes, common sense gun legislation, but it is also about creating opportunity, right? That we don't need more police in order to get guns off the street. We need more jobs. We need better schools. We need better funded teachers. We shouldn't have a culture that rewards people who are thugs like Donald Trump, who should have been in jail a long time ago for the crimes that he has committed. And we don't know how to pay teachers in this country, right? And so if we are going to have serious conversations about the narrative around gun violence, it is about how are we investing money that builds infrastructures of opportunities and not just pockets of opportunity that allows us to address the kind of hopelessness, that addresses the kind of dissatisfaction and disaffection that black and brown people are forced to experience in this country because of the way policy breaks our spirits.
All right. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Explain, contextualize why. So I've seen certain studies that say it's somewhere around 82% of white Christians voted for Donald Trump. Knowing, coming from a Christian background, knowing, understanding everything that the Lord stands for and everything like that, him being the antithesis of that, why is the white Christian church aligning with Trump? Is it just white supremacy? Is it, you know what I'm saying, from your perspective?
Because they're more white than Christian. And when your whiteness defines your Christianity, it is rooted in the fact that in their DNA, our ancestors whose slave ships were named for Jesus. And so if that is in your DNA, you basically will twist and flip over to accommodate whiteness, even if it contradicts Christianity. And so when they say they are white Christian nationalists, take out Christian and just stick with white and nationalism, because that's basically what they are. Because if they're Christian, then they follow the one who was born homeless. They follow the one who was under a genocidal policy of death because of Herod. They follow the one who grew up in a hood called Nazareth. They follow the one who gave free health care to those with pre-existing conditions. They follow the one who fed those who were food insecure. They follow the one who brought in those who were othered and cast out. They follow the one who got lynched under a criminal justice system that was criminal and downright unjust. But since I'm Baptist, they follow the one who got up on Sunday. So in light of the fact that they don't really follow him, they simply co-opt him in order to baptize their bigotry. I don't call them Christian because they're not. They're antichrist. And I think we have to start calling it like it is instead of allowing them to co-opt a name that is a name that is always on the side of those who are oppressed, othered, and outcast. I'll say one more thing to my sister, and that is, I hope in the media will stop saying black on black crime as a metaphor narrative in Chicago, because white folk kill more white folk than anybody else. It's neighbor on neighbor crime. You commit crime against those you are neighborly to. And so I want us to make sure that we also attack that narrative, because those same white Christian nationalists like to call on Chicago, but they don't want to deal with what goes on in their respective communities. Why? Because they don't make headlines at nighttime. They don't make headlines on our news. And so that's one way to change the narrative, and that is to quit allowing Chicago to be the metaphor for gun violence, because Chicago is not the metaphor for gun violence. I could call the roll of you have not had one mass shooter this year who looked like me.
Okay, y'all, I'm going to ask only media, Brother Justin, I'm sorry, because we are going to have a panel discussion, and other audience members will have an opportunity to speak to other folk, but I just want to, we have to restrict this to media. We're going to take 2 more questions. We do need to pivot to the panel discussion, because we do have panelists who are waiting, and some panelists have another function tonight that they have to get to. So I'm going to ask that 2 last questions. Here first.
Thank y'all for coming out today. I just wanted to address something today. We saw some mobilization down south. And sometimes it does take that tragedy to have a brother swim, to your assistance. Could you give us 3 points? Because I look at this room and, I really don't see that many 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds, or
I'm going to ask the question.
or just, no, 30-year-olds. So I just wanted 3 points that you can get these brothers to mobilize or energize or something that will get these new generation people to take your place one day in the name of justice.
All right. Good question. Give it to the young folks.
Well, as a millennial, as a 36-year-old who looks up to the generation that is continuing to do this type of work, is one, to name the fact that young Americans have always been the force to change this country, right? We often paint these narratives about the apathy of youth and the apathy of black boys and girls particularly, but I think it's important to name that you don't have the kind of groundswell of moral courage without young people, right? That the civil rights movement led by young people, the Black Lives Matter movement led by young people. The real question is, how do we integrate those street prophets who are leading the movement out there into spaces like this, right? And so part of the work has to be that churches, faith leaders have to figure out what it means not to lead sometimes, but to follow those who are already doing the work on the streets. The other way is, how are black churches and black faith leaders showing up in between crises, right? Is that what is important about the Progressive National Baptist Convention is that it is filled with churches who are not just situational justice leaders, but people who know how to respond to community crises between crises, because every day to be black in America is to live under a threat of death and an open season on you. And so how are we communicating to our young brothers, to our young sisters, because that's the demographic you talked about, that we are actually open for business in between crises, is something that we have to work to guarantee. And I think the third piece is, as we talk about what does it mean to mobilize a new generation of leaders, or how we not replace, but how we serve alongside this current generation that is leading us, is to name the fact that there are a lot of untapped gifts and imagination and creativity that lives outside of our church walls, right? And how are we as leaders, as the people of faith, harvesting skills, gifts, talents that we don't always see as vital in the church, right? I do think that we serve the threat of having our vibrancy, of our longevity, if we don't start to name the fact that there are certain gifts that make church, that could make church what it is, that don't involve what happens on Sunday mornings with choirs and happens on Sundays with the traditional ways that we think about ministry, but how are we inviting a new generation of folk in to actually add to what it means to do church? Those are 3 ways I think about bridging this generational divide.
Last question, and then we really do have to pivot to the panel.
I appreciate that. Contextualize for me, there was an absence of the church in 2014, in 2017 here. When I look at this room and I look at the activism that was taking place, not just on the streets, but in the city council meetings, in the town halls, whether it be Ferguson, whether it be Stockley, whether it was Minneapolis, whether it was Louisville, all the places I went to. These are not the people that I saw
I
present.
need you to ask the question.
So I'm getting to it.
Okay.
So with that absence, can you explain why there was such an absence of the church, and what is being done to make sure that if something like this comes up again, which God forbid it does, that they will be present in a larger capacity?
Well, I think it's important to name that it's somewhat of a misnomer to believe that the church was not present during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? For several reasons. We can name clergy in this room who showed up on the front lines and followed the leadership of young activists, right? That's number one. And this city dramatized. If you think about Starsky Wilson, you think about others, Tracy Blackman, who were Darrell Gray, who were pastoring in this city during that crisis, who served as a sort of emotional and spiritual safety net for warriors who were fatigued by what the state was doing to them, what the city was doing to them. The other piece that I think is important when we think about where was the church is to be clear that there's never been a mass of faith folk who show up to do justice work. This work has always been done with a remnant. All the studies are telling us now only 3 to 10% of the black church in the height of the civil rights movement was actually engaged. And so let's not judge today based on a romanticized understanding of how the civil rights movement worked, right? And the third thing I would want to name is we have to redefine what it means for the church to be present. Because if we only mean the church is present when a pastor shows up with a collar, then we miss the fact that churches are actually not run by pastors, but they're run by women who fund our churches, who keep our churches open, who keep our lights on. And there were many women and young people who were members of churches who were showing up in 14, showed up in 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 20, and 21. So when we talk about where was the church, let's also name where were the women who make up the church and the young people who make up the church, because just because you didn't see black male pastors on the front line, and they were too, doesn't mean that the church was not there, because the church has to be redefined from a clergy-centered perspective to a people-centered perspective, because we believe all power to the people.
And we're going to close. We're closing this part. But I want to acknowledge Reverend Tommy Pearson, if you'll just stand up for a minute with the cowboy hat. Reverend Tommy Pearson's church was the safe space for Ferguson activists. It was his church that was the safe space for Ferguson activists. So I want to make sure that I recognize and acknowledge Reverend Tommy Pearson. We're going to ask Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, our second vice president, if she will come in prayer and close out this part of the program and open up the second part of the program in that same prayer. And then we're going to invite our other panelists up, and we'll deal with the second part of our social justice town hall.
I certainly want to thank Reverend Willie Dwayne Francois for raising the question of women, because we call the name of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but it was a woman by the name of Dr. Prathia Hall who gave him the inspiration for the I Have a Dream speech. She was a preacher, a pastor, a scholar, and a member of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. And so, God, we thank you. We pause in this day. We still our minds, we still our bodies, we still our movement to acknowledge that you are yet God. We thank you for a day that we've never seen before, God. On this 9th anniversary, we are reminded on how precious life is. So for your grace and for your mercy, we say thank you. God, even though we continue to grieve by the reasons we must gather in this fashion, we are yet grateful that you have not forgotten about us, even though there are those who want to erase our existence and our history. You called us to remember who we are. And so we thank you for this aggregation of families and activists and members of the faith community and clergy who have come to say, in the words of our president, we won't stop. God, we can't do anything without your blessing, without your power, and without your spirit. So Spirit of the living God, fall fresh right now, not just on us in this room in St. Louis, but on every mother and father that is grieving the loss of their child, on every family that is wondering why is their way so hard, on every pastor and clergy person that is wondering if their activism is having any effect at all. We thank you because we recognize that even though our lives might feel like crucifixion, you are a God of resurrection. And so we speak resurrection power right now in the name of Jesus. And we thank you that although we live in a Good Friday world, that we know Resurrection Sunday is coming. So strengthen us for the journey that is ahead, God. I just want to pray for the person at the table I'm sitting next to. Because somebody came in this room with their own situation and their own challenges. But remind them, oh God, that they're not in the battle by themselves. That there is somebody that understands that the struggle must be fought in their generation, oh God. So give the person at my table just a bit more power. Give them a bit more courage and give them a bit more faith. And give them to know we are all in this thing together, and we will and we do claim the victory. In the name of the one whose name is above every other name, who told us that he had already overcome the world. In the name of Jesus, I pray. And all those that affirm and believe say amen, and ashe. And with that, we begin to make our transition to our panelists. And we're asking those who are part of the press conference to leave, and those who are joining the panel are able to come up at this time.
As we're making the transition, we do want to acknowledge a couple of people here. As Mike Brown Sr. comes up, Mr. Ernest Covington, Mr. Terrence Melvin, we want to acknowledge the presence of Fred Hampton Jr., Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. for the new Black Panther Party. We want to acknowledge your presence. Black Panther Party Club. Amen. Thank you for the correction.